Hi Derek, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Jeff. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Been a little while. I think last it was
Yes.
almost like at a conference at Museums Australia Conference, Western Australia. It was really the last time I had a chance to sit down and have a bit of a chat.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that would be it.
Yeah,
So, and that was a while ago.
it certainly was. The time whisks by. Um, so I just to start off with, maybe you could just give us a little bit of an intro about yourself and who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah. So I'm Derek Williamson. I'm live in Sydney, and I look after a little museum at the University of New South Wales called the Museum of Human Disease, a fairly particular collection of diseased human body parts. And my role is really around trying to get audiences to come in and learn from those things.
So, for the Museums Australia conference this year, there's one of the areas that the speakers are addressing is contested places. And what I thought we'd start off with is the first question that they've got in this space, which is, do museums and galleries contribute to social good? Do you think they do?
Well, I think absolutely they do. You know, there's so many ways in which museums and galleries contribute to people understanding themselves and historical context and things like that. I think every gallery and every museum is working to help people kind of understand the world around them and political situations and developments and all of those sorts of things, as well as just the understanding of objects and what we can learn from these things that come from the past or sometimes a little bit of the present, and how we can learn from those about making the world a better place or a more beautiful place, or simply understanding each other better. So I think certainly museums and galleries are always kind of places where social good happens, even if it's just good social interaction.
So you've run quite a lot of really good interactive programs since you've been at the museum. But what have you found is like been the most successful way to engage with that feeling that you're doing something, that's making things better or making a change for the better?
My museum's kind of quite a very particular place. It's simply the title of it kind of helps us organise people who are coming. People. There's a lot of people who don't come to a museum of human disease, and lots of people who do. But I think the biggest and best thing we have is we have some really good volunteers who are students of disease and pathology and medicine and things like that. And watching them talk to people about the specimens, I think is the kind of best interaction that we have. So although we run lots of programs that I think are really good and do exciting things, the place where I think we have the best interaction with people and do the most good, if we do any good, is in that opportunity that we have for people to talk about their experience of a disease, to hear from someone who can explain to them exactly what's going on inside a particular specimen or someone who has that disease. So helping people understand those things and then to understand the choices that we make and the impacts those have, and hopefully, people from our perspective go away a little bit more enlightened and a little bit more committed to kind of healthy choices and things like that. But it's really around that interaction with people, and I admit we're very lucky in that our audience is relatively small, and we do have a great core of kind of volunteers who are committed and really know their stuff. It's kind of amazing to hear these med students kind of and how much they know. It's just incredible, and how that interacts. So those things, I guess, are the thing where I see us doing kind of what I would say spectacular sort of stuff, but it really is just the day-to-day, all the events and things we run simply kind of move people towards that. I think that's the experience.
So do you think it's an opportunity for those medical students to behave or to use their knowledge in a way that they don't normally get to use it? Like Are they,
Oh,
I mean, in a situation where they might be sort of counselling someone about one of these diseases, must be a very different circumstance to actually describing why you're enthusiastic or why the research around it is so important.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, they tell us that they, for them it's good because they have to understand the concepts that they're learning really well to be able to then interpret them to someone who doesn't have the same academic background, and then to be able to talk about them in a way that's not clinical and not academic, and to explain what are really kind of fairly serious concepts and fairly serious science and medicine to people. So they really get a lot out of it as well. You know, they learn a lot and they engage deeply with their subject matter and stuff like that. And that, you know, is part of what we're doing as well. You know, we're part of this educational organisation, and so the experience that the students get is very important to us as well.
So do the audiences, are they other students, or do you find that it's bringing people onto campus that are not students, or how do you work that? You know, I mean, there must be a big sell to kind of get people.
It is. We have one particular audience, which is our high school audience, and we hit a few really key curriculum areas around kind of health and disease in a range of different kind of subject matters, and so we have a great and strong following amongst kind of HSC students. So that's fantastic for us. You know, we get a plethora of 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and most of the people that our volunteers are talking to are these students, and kind of trying to contextualise the curriculum in terms of this is what it really looks like when someone has a disease. So there's that. But then, you know, we do have a small public following, and we do holiday programs and stuff in which we get families through. And again, our volunteers kind of work with them. They'll run dissection workshops, and they'll talk to people about kind of relating zombie diseases to the real diseases we have, and those sort of things. So there is a degree to which it's a bit of a difficult sell, and the way we're set up, and we're a Monday to Friday organisation, so kind of it's difficult to attract the key public audiences, I guess, that everybody else kind of likes to attract, because they like to come on weekends and we're shut.
So, I mean, one of the things I've discussed with other people over the course of these conversations has been the limitations of our physical space. That, you know, often museum is seen as a museum of this, a museum of that, and that when we're talking about places that maybe are places to experiment or contested places, often everyone talks about the physical, you know, walls and barriers around you, but it does seem like those walls are breaking down, and there's lots of opportunities to kind of move outside of them if you can convince people that the museum isn't about the physical objects in this particular physical space. Have you had any opportunities to kind of look at how that might work, let's say, across the campus?
We probably not across campus so much. I mean, we do some, you know, engage with social media and those sort of things, and I think those are spaces that lend themselves to that sort of activity. But certainly, you know, we do video conference programs and things like that. We do digital learning tools and lessons and things that we have kind of freely available for schools and anyone else to kind of come and have a look at and kind of learn about things, and we're always trying to kind of refresh those. So those are, I think, the some of the elements. And then there's things like, you know, we did our iHeart Music, where we recorded people's heartbeats and played it to musicians who improvised music around it. And in one particular set of that, we worked with organisations around Australia, and they would record heartbeats from their kind of audience, send it to us, the musicians would play it in our museum, and then we kind of webcast it back to kind of the audience at the other end. So certainly I think there are lots of ways now with that sort of internet webcasting sort of thing, and I guess what you and I are doing here, to be able to put what we do out there in a very different sort of way.
Yeah, because it does seem that this discussion about sort of, whether museums and galleries do social good is often revolving around, you know, um, the collections they have and the ability of those collections to describe uh, things that people feel are meaningful to their current lives. But in lots of ways, museum visits are just, I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember from when I was a kid, I would go on a museum visit, and it didn't really matter what museum I went to, I was just going on a museum visit, and they still have that place in our society. God knows how, but they still, have this status almost that people will go uh, to a museum for an experience, and they don't really know what the experience is going to be. And I think that's kind of good. I think that we're still quite lucky in that way. Have you
Oh,
found that?
absolutely. Sorry.
No, I just absolutely. I just saying that. Have you found that that's been the case? That when you're working in different environments, that the museum provides inspiration both for the person that works there and for the visitor. And it's a bit sort of fluid. People like to think of them as concrete boxes full of this object, but it's working in them. There's a lot of fluidity around them, isn't there?
There is, and really it's about kind of the audience and what they're coming for. And as you say, I think lots of people come with very little expectation, especially if they're just coming to visit the museum. If they're coming for a particular exhibition or something like that, then certainly I think there's, more of a structure around what they expect and how they're going to interact with that and what they bring with them and what they know. But for others, people coming with families or with friends just looking for something to do and they just drop in at a museum and have a look around, I think those are really important occasions for people, because I think, it's the surprise factor, and I think that's what I like about museums. And my favourite museums are the ones that just have a whole heap of stuff on display, and from one spot to the next, you don't know what you're going to see. It's some old shells and it's old photographs of people sitting in white suits in the middle of the Broome outback or something. So there's those sort of surprises that I think are important in museums that people come for. And galleries. If you come to an art gallery, you walk around and suddenly you see something and you go, wow, that's just amazing. And, you might have been to the gallery before and you've just never noticed that thing, or the light's on in a different way or whatever. It's just this thing that suddenly takes your attention and becomes meaningful for you at that point. And for me, that's the perfect museum experience.
And that's something I think that, everything gets so worked out. Like now there's, particularly as in a larger museum, there's so many people doing so many tasks that by the time it's put through all the cookie cutters, at the end of it, it seems a bit kind of like, you're going to the same museum, a bit like you're going to the same city that's got the same skyscrapers. And that surprise is kind of like lost in it all. Whereas in smaller museums, often you can't avoid the surprise because there's nowhere else to store what you've got. It's just out there. You are what you are, sort of thing.
I completely agree. And I guess this is where it comes to that kind of contested places and contested spaces sort of thing for me, is that when you curate something to death, so to speak, so that it's immensely perfect and trying to say exactly the right thing, you take away people's ability to kind of disagree with you, even if they do. Whereas if I like to see the chipped and broken plates and things, and go, well, this is the one someone thinks is the most important thing in this collection, but I judge things differently, and this other one to me might be kind of more important and more wonderful. So I think there is a degree to which our selection and display limits people's experience to what we want them to learn, and that I think is where we lose that idea of here's a space that is contestable, that people can kind of argue with us about something, or because they don't know what we've got, they don't know what they could possibly be talking about, you know, unless they have a certain expertise in a particular field, and that then, you know, limits that surprise factor for people. You know,
yeah,
and
ways, you think that you know, the whole notion of curation of these spaces is you know, getting the artist in or getting the person to reinterpret. But I think personally that most of the people I've met, anyway, that do curatorial work are as much artists as they are traditional curators, and that's been a big shift that I don't think has been recognised that much within the profession. And I think lots of curators are capable of producing equal or better work than a lot of the artists that are brought in to kind of reinterpret the collections. You've had a bit of experience with bringing artists into your collections, and it's been very successful. What do you think's the key? Is it the collaboration, or?
For me, I think it's about there needs to be collaboration, but I need to be clear on what my aim is and what my goal is, and is this artist going to achieve that for us? You know, so recently we had a video artist called John Douglas who came in, and he is a kidney, or was at that point, a kidney dialysis patient, and because of his kidney issues and his dialysis and medications and things, he had this whole host of other diseases that people on dialysis get because they're trying to cope with their body, trying to deal with all the drugs and the things. And so he came in and he was taking images of the specimens of the diseases he had as well as his kidneys, and then creating an artwork around that. And the artwork is like many artworks, you know, people looking at it could just go, it's just a thing, you know, and not really understand it. But when John talks about it, because he's passionate about the disease, because he's a patient and it's been his life for a very long time, and he's passionate talking to people about it, and I knew we were going to get something where the message wasn't going to get kind of diluted, you know, around those sorts of things. You know, I wasn't particularly concerned whether John was talking about, you know, saying this is a museum of human disease specimen that I photographed. That wasn't really what was important, but what was important was that the messages that John was talking about weren't just about kind of the artistic merit of what he was doing, but as well as that, the messages are around kind of the health stuff, you know. And likewise, when we worked with Simon, our musician, who kind of coordinated the jazz stuff, you know, it was important that we understood that he came from a frame not just of making music, but of creating an experience for people, you know, and that was what we wanted, was people to experience kind of the idea of a heartbeat, and that the heartbeat in there was important, and that part of that was also the kind of projection of the ultrasound images and a whole range of other things that, you know, we worked together closely on trying to kind of engage that in the best possible way. So I think it's about knowing what you want and then working with the artist to ensure that you kind of get that. It probably doesn't happen 100% of the time with the stuff we've done, but I think you can kind of work towards ensuring that it contains the key messages that you need to do. If you need to, you know, some places may not need to and are happy just to have someone come in and interpret a collection simply for the sheer joy of having someone interpret their collection or an object or whatever it is for their audience, you know. And I think those are valuable things as well. So there's that, you know, a degree of balance around those things. But I guess for us, we have fairly key messages, and we have a range of kind of limitations around how we can portray our collection. You know, it can't be seen as purely a voyeuristic experience. It needs to be an educational basis to it, and that's kind of, you know, we're mandated that, you know, not just from our own kind of thinking, but there's legislation around that, you know, so we really need to be kind of carefully showing oversight around those sort of things, which, you know, makes our experience probably a little bit different to others.
So you can't just, like, the whole thing is just open the doors and you know, let people just come in and browse around the collection. It requires some kind of interpretation is available as soon as the person walks in the door.
Yeah. So for us, it's part of the fact, you know, these are people that we have on display. You know, it's human tissue, and we need to be seen to be using that for good, I guess, not just kind of providing the opportunity for people to look, but to explain the things that are there and provide them with, you know, a range of mechanisms to interact with that in a way that helps them understand better. So, you know, our volunteer programs and our images of disease app and kind of audio tours and a whole range of things like that, which we know people come in and they use those, and just like they do in every other museum, they kind of stop halfway around and then they're just walking around and they're looking and thinking and those sort of things. But I think in the ways that we create experiences for people, it needs to be done in a way that is seen not simply as creating objects, but or using our specimens as objects, but as kind of representations of disease and suffering and learning.
I suppose that's true, isn't it? Because they're not. It's not like you're looking at just a human being or a piece of a human being. It's been collected for a particular reason, and it's the whole reason it's ended up where it is because of whatever has affected the tissue to get there. So it is as much about what the disease is exposed in the tissue, which couldn't be exposed anywhere else, maybe in a plant or another animal or something, but the fact that it is a human disease is kind of needs the tissue to show it, rather than the tissue being on display, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's, you know, what we're conscious of, you know, is that balance between the kind of clinical observation of these things as disease processes, and then the reality, which is it was a disease process in a person, and how do we respect that person? How do we appreciate that this thing has been generously left for people to learn that we are extending the use of these things from, you know, the original setting of a collection that was available to medicine students to learn from into a public domain where we have slightly less control over kind of what people are thinking and what they might do with that object or thinking about that object, you know. So we put a lot of emphasis on reminding people that, you know, this is different to lots of other places, and there's a certain degree of respect that we ask people to pay our collection that perhaps other places, you know, don't.
So does that mean there's a certain sort of part of it where you might enter into irreverence or comedy, or I mean, I'm thinking here of something like a war memorial or something like that. There's a certain feeling about it that is inherent, that, you know, to move outside of those boundaries is a much more difficult task for you, I guess.
Oh, it certainly is, you know, and not just going to things like, you know, comedy and how do we lighten the atmosphere and those sort of things, but even to slipped my mind. You know, but the idea of people always, one of the common questions we get is, you know, what's your favourite specimen? And that's a really difficult question to ask in a collection like ours, or to answer in a collection like ours, because if you say it's a favourite, well, how do you say that about a disease when people have had this? You know, that everything we do is around trying to, you know, the university is working towards minimising the impact of these, but everywhere people are experiencing these diseases, how do we talk about a disease both as a, and again, it's, I guess, that balance between the clinical kind of idea of this thing about which we can make a joke, but then there are experiences that people have that mean when they're looking at a specimen, they look at it in a completely different way. You know, but for someone who's had that disease, the experience of looking at that thing can't be understood by someone who hasn't had the disease, I don't think. No, you know, so that kind of stuff. And then how do you make it, you know, so we do presentations and often, you know, we use humour and comedy as much as we can, you know, but we always kind of preempt it with, and, you know, we talk about, you know, we have a classic kind of Australia's top 20 killers talk, and always preempt that with, you know, it doesn't matter that this one kills more people. The experience of a disease on an individual scale is just as important for the rarest of diseases as it is for the most common one. You know, that just because more people have it doesn't mean it's necessarily more important on that individual scale, or if your loved one has that rare disease, that's a devastating thing for you. So we kind of, you know, glorify in some ways those, you know, the with our ribbons and all of those things, the big diseases, and yet their impact is kind of on an individual scale no more impacting for the person who has the disease and the people that care about them and the little ones. So those sort of discussions are things that it is kind of difficult to have in terms of, you know, and I guess my answer usually to that question about what's your favourite specimen comes back to, there's a couple of specimens that we have which show diseases that are gone in Australia because of vaccination. And to me, those are important specimens because they help us to tell people, well, this is what happens if we don't do these things, you know. And those are stories that I think are the important stories. So it's really the stories behind these things and how that might help us to kind of understand what's going on in our current context that are kind of important.
So I guess too, the specimens themselves are kind of, even though they're personal experiences of somebody, literally, they're also kind of divorced from their context. So like in a lot of museum collections, it's all about provenance. It's about, you know, the story relates to, you know, who had actually owned the object or used the object or made the object. In your case, it's kind of, the provenance is kind of cut away, not probably literally, but you know what I mean. It's yeah, not the thing that's generating the story. So you've got a very different relationship in some ways with these objects as a museum professional from other museums.
Certainly, it's you know, that's one of the difficulties is we don't have lots of those stories. You know, for most of our specimens, we have a one paragraph clinical history of, you know, and written from the doctor's perspective or the medical examiner's perspective in lots of cases of this is ... You know, we don't have the person, we don't know about their life, we don't know who was holding their hand when they went through this, we don't know all of those things that would be, you know, that would make these stories just so much more powerful. And we're kind of, you know, always thinking about how we might be able to kind of provide those stories. So there's that element to it. And then there's the element that, you know, this is still a used educational collection. So, you know, our specimens are in classrooms every day being looked at and studied by medical students and pathology students and people like that. So those kind of things. But really that kind of clinical nature of what we know about these specimens is in a museum context, as you say, a little bit debilitating for us.
But maybe liberating in a way too. I must say that.
Oh, certainly, you know, because it allows us to say what happens now, you know. So the stories we tell are really about, and you know, our collection is not incredibly old, but in a medical breakthrough sense, our specimens, you know, predate most of kind of, you know, the most recent developments in medicine, you know. So at the point our collection was made, we have specimens of kind of childhood leukemia that when the specimen was collected in the 60s, a diagnosis of that leukemia 95% of the time meant that the patient, the child, went on to die. The experience now is that diagnosis is followed by a 95% recovery rate because of medical breakthroughs, and we discovered, you know, we recognise things earlier and we detect them earlier and we have new ways of treating them and all of those things. So there's that, you know, those sort of stories are probably a little bit easier to tell when you don't necessarily have to tell the story of the person's experience, but to use it as a way of highlighting, well, this is what medicine and medical research and kind of medical science has done over the course of this period of time, and is continuing to do, you know. So those, as you say, can be a little bit liberating to kind of not necessarily have to focus on the life of someone at the time.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, thanks, Derek. I think we're going to wind up now. I think we're probably going. I'm not sure how long we've going, but we certainly. We usually try to stick to about 15 minutes, but I've never been able to do that because everything's so interesting. Yeah, it keeps on going. But thanks so much for talking with us. And
no, absolutely fine.
Yeah, thank you, Derek.
All right. No